Hello everybody, and welcome to today's seminar. I am Luca Raimondi, Marie Sklodowska-Curie Research Fellow in King's English Department, and I'm here today with Professor Ananya Kabir, also from King's English Department, and Dr. Bindu Menon from Azim Premji University in Bangalore. So today is the second seminar of a mini-series on Archipelagic Indias, which Ananya and I are curating with the main, within the main India Institute seminar series. So first of all, I want to thank the India Institute for their collaboration in organizing this mini-series and also for their hospitality. We had a first seminar around 3 weeks ago, and our guest was Dr. Shazia Rahman from the University of Dayton, and she took us, not physically, only in spirit, to the Andaman Islands with a reading of Uzma Aslan Khan's novel, The Miraculous True History of Nomi Ali. And we learned about the late colonial history of the islands, the history of the Japanese occupation, and also we were introduced to some Ongi terminology and to the indigenous conception of time and space in the islands. If you are interested in catching up with it and you missed it, unfortunately, you can find the recording online in King's Global Affairs YouTube channel. Today, our guest will take our gaze westward to another Indian archipelago, the archipelago of the Lakshadweep. And as we know, the Lakshadweep archipelago has been very much in the news this year, specifically after several administrative reforms were introduced, were proposed that many believe would destabilize the ecology and the livelihood and culture of the islands. So all the more important for us to invite someone that would help us know more of the culture and the history of the archipelago. So I'm very happy to welcome our guest today, Dr. Bindu Menon. Bindu teaches media studies at Azim Premji University. Her research and publications focus on the history of the early 20th century cinema and cinema publics in South India, histories of media and migration, and Oceanic Humanities. Bindu is currently working on a monograph titled Forgotten Futures, Cinema, Public and Senses in the Princely State, Travancore 1900-1950. And the title of her talk today is On the Edge, Island, Indigeneity and Geo-Ontologies in Lakshadweep Media Imaginaries. Her talk will be followed by a short response from Professor Ananya Kabir, and we will then open up for Q&A. I just want to say that if any questions pop up in your mind during the presentation, you can write them in the chat box. I will collect them and they will be addressed at the end of the talk. Also, if you must leave earlier and you have a question that you want to ask, you can do the same and you will be able to catch up with the answer in the recording that will also be uploaded in King's Global Affairs YouTube channel in around a week, 10 days or so. Okay, so we are ready to start. On to you, Bindu, and thank you.
Thank you, Luca and Ananya, for a very warm welcome and generous introduction. I very much appreciate this invitation to speak in the Archipelago series that you have very efficiently organized. I've been learning about Lakshadweep in the recent months, actually, and this is a new project for me. And part of that journey has been inspired by conversations with Ananya Kabir, in person, online, and her very, very inspiring project with IATIO on the archipelagos of India and of Indian Ocean, and also the process of tribalization and so on. So it kind of, this work literally pushed me to thinking more about Lakshadweep, And I will begin my conversation rather cinematically by showing a film clip from the 1977 Malayalam film called Dweepa, which is in Malayalam translates into island. And for most Malayalis who are the nearest mainland coast to the Lakshadweep archipelago, Dweepa means Lakshadweep. So I'll just begin by showing this clip. So I have to caution you that I will have to shift quite a bit between sharing different kinds of screens and the PPT and so on, because I would like to really present some of the visual material that I'm talking about. So here we go. I won't be showing the. I will screen the film, but I'm not going to play the. I'll speak as this rolls on my screen, because what is really important is not quite the music scape of what we're going to watch, but rather some other visual devices that's happening. Move back to my PowerPoint at this moment. How do we trace if you look at the singular archives of social media images and cultures, emerging as the most important site to read and gauge the broader spatial, social, and political realm of Lakshadweep, how do we trace the genealogies of media cultures that has emerged in Lakshadweep, for example? More importantly, how do we tell the story of media insularity, a creation of both state and commercial neglect, as well as the story of emerging media connections? How do we map the connectivity among literal societies to screen imaginaries, desires, and exposure? So what I try to do is that in the first half of this paper, I will examine the medial dimensions of the island making, focusing on films that are themed on Lakshadweep, radio and television broadcasting that followed Indian independence. The second part responds to the recent proliferation of island media that have a strongly, that deploys strongly various mechanisms through which island conceptions are self-reflexively foregrounded and complicated. A very illuminative small moment appeared in the film that we just watched. I'm not talking about the film clip that we watched, but about how the narrative thematizes Lakshadweep, what tropes emerge in that process, etc. Because in many ways, the film Dweepa is also representative of a very first set of imaginaries around Lakshadweep. This very illuminative small moment appears in the film when a very childlike, pure, and innocent character called Bakru, a teenager, asks his family members to get him an elephant, a bus, and a train when they return from their visit to mainland in India, in this particular case, Kerala. All three objects absent in the island life are a source of wonderment for not just the teenager, but for all the islanders, as we learn from the sense of rejoice evidently displayed by the visitors during their visit to Kerala. This dynamic of a pristine, underdeveloped island and the advanced mainland forms the grid for the handful of screen imaginaries of Lakshadweep. This discursive reductionism of Lakshadweep lends itself to a colonial gaze, a gaze that seems to be framing the post-colonial nation state as well. When approaching screen imaginaries of Lakshadweep, we confront a vast site of absences and voids. Spread across a period of 50 years and disparate time points, these films offer a discourse on complex systems, metaphors, and relations that has come to define the island. Lakshadweep's islandness becomes the textual device to construct the superiority of mainland India, and becomes a site of confluences of purity, perceived backwardness, and singularity. The title cards of Dweepa that we watched just now begins with the globe spinning, as you can recollect, and transitions to a sequence of the Indian Ocean map that glides over the rim of the ocean, zooms down to a map of the Lakshadweep Islands, and slides to the rural landscape of Kerala. An aerial play of sorts from above with limited technological means. In Dweepa, the narrative is also propelled by the premise of its orientation to see with the cartographer's eye. In conceiving of this spontaneous journey, the protagonist relies upon a latent spatial awareness on maps and charts, a place that could be sensed only through maps until then. This contrast between the relatively static order of the maps viewed from above and the mobility and temporality of lives in motion to the island reminds us of the many dualities that underlies life in mainland Kerala, as we see in the rest of the film. To just quickly summarize, the protagonist, belonging to a middle class, dominant caste family, leaves for Minicoy. He comes from a generation of mounting unemployment in the 1970s, late 1970s, and he finds a job in Minicoy. In Minicoy, what confronts him is a land which he perceives as warm, friendly, but rather very different from what he's used to. Very interestingly, what we see, so he embarks on a kind of epistolary letter writing process to his father, where he talks about the island in these eloquent terms, as we see here. As eloquent as it is, it is also, as you can see, occupying a cartographer's eye, which the film kind of begins with. So in what happens in his first encounter with the island, and particularly the uneducated childlike Bakru, when he expresses his desire to learn, the protagonist Chandran proclaims that his mission is to educate every islander. Literacy, a key indicator of social development, has received focal attention as early as 19th century in many parts of Kerala. Through missionary interventions, courtly initiatives, and propelled by social reform movements in the early 20th century. The total literacy program, launched in 1990 in Kerala, was also termed the Sakshadita Yajnam in Malayalam, with overwhelming tones of a ritual. Reading Chandran's missionary zeal to educate the islanders, along with a decade-long history of Lakshadweep school system that has employed teachers from mainland Kerala, frames for us much of the civilizing mission of a newly independent nation state and state actors towards its outlying regions. It lays the trope of the pristine, yet to modernize, yet to be civilized island population, a trope that is sustained over many decades. Finally, not very different from the films division documentaries that we'll see now, Dweepa shares the Nehruvian developmentalist vision of progress. The first films division documentary to be made, called Lakshadweep in 1974, turns its camera to a survey mode akin to the colonial surveys of caste communities of the subcontinent. The Films Division of India, which produced documentary, which continues producing documentaries as part of the state's information mission, has subsequently produced 5 more documentaries on the archipelago, assessing its progress and development in various aspects of island life. These themes include religious practices, festivals, dance performances, education system, fishing practices, among others. Here are a few films to look at, diverse in their themes, in their approach. Nonetheless, they share this Nehruvian vision of progress for serving the island. If we fast forward to the contemporary, the much acclaimed web series by Amazon Prime, The Family Man, represents another moment and an opposite manifestation of this ideology that we just saw. The series centralized around the theme of national security and an intelligent expert's struggle to keep his domestic life going, begins with the capture of 2 suspected members of ISIS from Lakshadweep. Lakshadweep, as a potential hideout of ISIS members of Kerala origin, is a thread that is repeated over the series. It certainly picks up a common sense thread of Islamophobic and statist reporting tradition generated across national and local media and supported by various government agencies such as the National Intelligence Agency. Lakshadweep's connections with Kerala and the pliability of the island community unfolds in these references. The recent OTT platform release, Malik, in 2021, also observes and establishes a congenial touch with this kind of a reference of the archipelago as harboring extremist Islamist forces. A film drawn from a real incident of violent shootouts in the Bhimapalli area of Travancore and drawing from elements from the biography of Muslim social political leader Abdul Nasser Madani, charged under the draconian law of UAPN since 2005. There is a crucial moment in the film following the assassination of an extremist Hindu right-wing leader. Malik and his fiancée escapes to the Minicoy Island, marry and make the island their hideout. Again, I'll return to the sharing the screen and the song sequence here for, of course, in silent mode. Sorry, I'm finding it slightly difficult to grab the screen that I want. Please give me a second. Right. The song, whose lyrics are set to Dol Patu, the Lakshadweep traditional music genre, weaves in a narrative of the beautiful coral reefs as a paradise and an escape. Later in the film, a confrontation between Coast Guard and Malik and his team is also staged near the water.
എന്നുങ്ങാവാ നമുക്കൊല്ലാതെ വിട്ടത് ഫിദ.
നീ ഇപ്പൊ കടലക്കെങ്ങതും പോവലേ?
ഫോണ്ടേ മീൻ കുറവ്, അതിനും വേറെ പണിക്ക് ഫോണ്ടേ.
വിവരം കൊണ്ടാ
ഓള് മാത്രമെങ്കിലല്ലോ.
നിന്നെ മൂത്തോൻ എന്നെ മനുഷ്യങ്ങളോ അവന് കെട്ടണ പെണ്ണിനെ കാര്യം നീ തന്നെ കെട്ടിക്കോ. ഞങ്ങൾ ദുബായിക്ക് പോയി കഴിഞ്ഞാ ഇക്കാ കടം വീട്ടിലാങ്ങില്ലേ. ഫെരിശില്ലെങ്കിലും ചൊല്ലുണ്ട, ഫെരിശെങ്ങന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ വിചാരിച്ചോളും.
ഞാൻ കാണാത്ത കഴിച്ച പെണ്ണാണ്ടോ നീ? നാക്കത് അറിയണം.
ആരാൻ പറഞ്ഞ ബസലിനെ ഉച്ച ബന്നിനെ
Sinjar draws from the Sinjar massacre of 2014, in which thousands of Yazidi men and women were besieged by the Islamic terrorist group in the Iraqi district. And the film takes a fictional leap and centralizes the struggles of two women who escaped from Sinjar and returned to their homeland of Lakshadweep. Such fictional liberties in mainstream filmmaking, while fully inhabiting the medium, also effectively translate state discourse to tangible politics for the masses. In this intriguing nexus of mainstream media, economic exchange, and nationalist imagination, what kind of media ecology has developed in the Lakshadweep archipelago? So if we trace back, cinema exhibitions till the arrival of video technology in the archipelago consisted of Films Division of India documentaries and screenings of Malayalam and Hindi language films through public screening facilities, using mostly government machinery and mobilizing nodes of non-theatrical exhibition circuits. Conceived as programs targeting the simple and backward rural audiences, FTI film programming included documentaries on themes of development, 5-year plans, agriculture, industry, and similar themes of progress. The constituent elements of such fantasies, as evident in the new screen imaginaries, are getting increasingly tethered to discourses of hypernationalism, Islamophobia, and necropolitics. If we move to other kind of media technologies like video and radio, it would be 1990s for the video technologies to take hold of the imagination of the islanders, supplying Malayalam VH cassettes and programming from Doordarshan. The Kerala Legislative Assembly debates of 1992 shows the establishment of a television production unit in 1992 and training women islanders, but the production the unit stops in 1992 itself. Radio, on the other hand, seems to have caught on the island much early in the 1960s. The British shortwave enthusiast Jeff Watt seemed to have linked to radioactivity in Lakshadweep as early as 1961. Radio was established in the Minicoy Islands in 1941 by the British government to facilitate government communication. The station was open to the public for communicating messages to mainland India by 1958, and with constant upgradations in 1982 and 2000, radio has been a very major presence in Lakshadweep. Lakshadweep's radio past, thus figuratively and literally, is entangled in processes of global media scales. It is also a very favorite destination of radio de-expeditions by radio enthusiasts. The special processes involved in connecting through airwaves in translocal ways and with the larger radio technology elsewhere, as Vibhuti Duggal argues, is a primordial aspect of radio. In looking at technology and its role in carving new communities of listening and even new oral geographies, especially after Indian independence, the regional vernacular and its imaginaries emerged as the dominant site of transformation. Regional developments and processes associated with broadcasting inserted new scripts and new demands into such oral processes. With the setting up of radio stations in Kavaratti and Minicoy, and with new technologies enabling greater access to musical entertainment, new spaces, and listening subjects proliferated. Technology and media were thus important mediating factors in the process of expanding the remit of art, music, and even of altering its contours and repertoire. Predominantly programmed in Malayalam language, these initiatives had important consequences. In Lakshadweep, the expansion of the listening public produced a parallel movement in the form of the local music, audio narrations of locally written stories, and so on, whose oral politics was organized around different aesthetic conceptions and axes of language, style, audioscapes, and acoustic expectations. In these preliminary inquiries, in the dispersed archives of radio, one could locate moves that can breaks the insularity of islands through airwaves. The elemental properties of airwaves, atmospherics, in relation to geography and place, is in communication technologies, is again explored by Vibhuti Digbal in colonial India and Caribbean islands by Alejandra Bosman. Drawing on Dylan Robinson's concept of hungry listening, Dugal argues that a multisensorial listening, which places song and music as part of not merely ritual structures, but also legal ones. This mode of listening, born of indigenous peoples and identities, is an assertion of their sovereignty and, importantly, is one that foregrounds relationality. The arrival of 4G voices, services, and mobile infrastructures since 2010 has initiated several shifts in mediascapes of the archipelago. In the diversity of themes, styles, and platforms, the borders of water seems to be less insular and more relational. The mobility of digital video is exploited to a great advantage in the last decade for a peripheral space like the Lakshadweep archipelago. So we'll come across music videos, stage performances, short films, documentaries, and vlogs, filling the island media space across platforms such as YouTube, Instagram Reels, TikTok clips, and so on, creating a vernacular archives that illuminate the everyday life of the archipelago. Manipulating linguistic landscape and challenging the dominant vernacular, says linguist anthropologist Nishan Choksi, has been a significant move in delineating indigenous politics for various indigenous movements. Many short films in the Jasari language, like Numma Natuku Banna Bahala, or similar such videos and short films, goes beyond the impulse of documentary to represent, but engender a shared life of lack and the brutality of infrastructures. The upcoming film by the first woman filmmaker of Lakshadweep, Aisha Sultana, also explores the failure of health infrastructure of the archipelago. Stylistically, these videos provide a heterogeneous mix of travel videos, inspiration from Malayalam New Wave cinema, and the aesthetics of music videos. The well-crafted documentary called Swells of Munamba, for example, is something that is themed on the magnificent tides of surfing in Minicoy and surfing as a way of life for a few islanders, and embraces stylistic elements that include high quality camera work of tidal ebbs and flows, recorded music, and ethnographic bites emulating National Geographic documentaries. A very highly acclaimed short film, Appalam Malanyam, which dwells on a conflict between two rural youth in the carnivalous backdrop of a football match, drawing upon the textual idioms of Malayalam New Wave cinema, is something which is subtitled in Malayalam and shot in the Jasari language. These layered spatio-temporal dimensions of many of these films transpires within a matrix of spatial relationships and natural phenomena of wind, sea, coral reefs, lagoon, coconut groves, fish, and other creatures. These multiple registers and the exchanges between them draw our attention towards the diffused politics of the media field in Lakshadweep. While media texts emerge from mainland Indian initiatives, textually construct the Lakshadweep Islands by prioritizing the role of vision with attendant colonial assumptions. The island mediascapes present an analysis of how broader poetical experience of island life are offered through hearing, smell, and taste. These newer mediascapes also conceive islands in their textual construction through spatial practices. This includes traveling, surfing, other kinds of explorations of the sea, movement in general, and interventions in the island space as identified in the text that I briefly introduced. These layered, entangled societies that ensue on the archipelago are presented as establishing themselves and provoke questions about internationalization, dependence, and autonomy in their themes and in their aesthetics. Through the production and circulation of video material, Lakshadweep bloggers also create an island public culture that has emerged as the most important voice of the island during the recent Save Lakshadweep campaign on social media. And thus registers the power of an enumerative publicness. The corpus of videos that make up the island media in Lakshadweep now is clearly formed outside the state media networks and circuits, and raises important questions about social imaginaries and politics that are local and geo-ontological in the modes in which they are produced. Anthropologist Elizabeth Povinelli, while exploring her work with the Caribbean Film Collective, theorizes the relationship between extractive economies and filmic creations as counter-discursive and beyond the frames of representation, but one that is made up of habituation. The question that then needs to be asked in the context of emergent Lakshadweep media is not whether it is a collective, but to ask the most important question that what do these local instances of analytical existence through mundane habituations of media work present to us? I would like to argue, looking at this long trajectory, shifting paradigms of representative logics, colonial gaze, and so on, to one of habituation where the island media ecology guides us towards a recognition of peripheral spaces and how they think, embody, sense, and create form and content. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bindu, for your talk. And it was very good also to be able to see on screen as you were speaking, not just to see the clips themselves that you showed, specifically the one from Sinja, but also to see the images, even in silent mode. It really helped, I think, visualize what you were talking about, which is a different culture, a different geography, very far from here, at least, as we are sitting in cold London. So I will now ask Ananya to respond to Bindu, and then we can open up to the Q&A. And again, if you have any questions, you can start dropping them in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand with the Zoom tool, and I will make sure to give you the chance to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Luca. Thank you, Bindu. That was really amazing. I'm afraid that we have had a bit of a selfish intention in in asking people like you to join us, and that's really because we want to learn. We really have had this agenda in mind through Luca's project. We were curious to know particularly about precisely what you pointed out to us, media imaginaries, a lot of discourse that is opaque to us because personally, for example, my orientation is from the north, so we neither know Malayalam, forget about Jasari, so much of rich material really passes us by because we don't have the tools to tap into them. And so it's obviously in that spirit of learning from the experts, learning from someone yourself who has those tools, and is indeed moving towards projects where we will know more about this area, which not because of location, but also kind of because of it in a way is not so much in our scholarly mainstream. And I think it's a shame because, as you pointed out to us, this area is enormously rich. The material that you showed us, we are so grateful that you took the trouble. We know how discombobulating it is on Zoom, to switch between screens. Everything was perfect. It went really smoothly, but really you put it together meticulously for us. And thank you, because it'll go on the record for the YouTube, and it's going to be a real resource for many of us, I think, to just even know what's the history of media, presentation of this space. So I'll just say a few comments. I mean, I know that we have quite a small audience because it is obviously, I think, Zoom fatigue time, end of semester. We apologize for having to put the seminar back for a week because of industrial action here. But I think the main thing is that we're having a conversation, and that's what I'm enjoying about it. So I'm going to, raise a few issues. Luca is also, of course, here, and this is central to his work. So I think he must be dying to ask a few questions too. And, we'll make use of the remaining 15 minutes or so and see if there's, of course, anything in the Q&A from our audience as well. So for me, Bindu, I mean, overall, I couldn't help think of my earlier work on Kashmir because, the space of Kashmir was also obviously spectacularly produced for the post-colonial nation through the apparatus of popular cinema. And many of the camera's moves reminded me of some of the framing methods of those films. For example, with Dweepa, I think that whole credit section, which used the map, we have many such moments in the 1960s Kashmir films, the ones which I've analyzed as the first phase, which are associated with Technicolor, which are associated with Shami Kapoor, with a certain kind of popular, frothy fun and games for the nation. And Kashmir was the space of escapism. But what I argued is that those fun, teenage kind of youthful fun films were never really very far from politics because of the way, for example, the camera would hover over the, people are talking in an office, but on the back of the wall is hanging a big map of India, things like that. Of course, in Dweepa, it was very centralized because to put it in the credits like that, I was just really, it was a combination of Panikkar, and Nehru, somehow visually. Fascinating focuses on the relation between the coastline and the mountains, because sometimes we zoomed into the Himalayas, then we lost the water altogether. Then we came and we saw the two coasts, both through the bird's eye view. So I would certainly, if I had to devise a new course for thinking about Indianness, through cinema, I would certainly want to draw attention to these films, because I think they were doing some very powerful work in, as you said, there was a conjunction really of the archipelagic with the Indian Ocean. That was a theoretical lens which allowed you to really, zoom into these kinds of moments and make some sort of theoretical sense of them. So obviously, I think, as you said, these kinds of materials really help us rethink disciplinary boundaries, but also cartographic boundaries. I also like what you said about, at the same time, because it's cinema, it allows us to dwell on the elemental aspects of island life. And I would wonder whether you would think in that kind of capture, there isn't some sort of, excess, cinematic excess, which we are, of course, seeing a new phase with the Lakshadweep collective, interventions, but maybe already something escapes, the popular camera's gaze and enables us, even against the grain, understand something about the particularity of this island life, its elemental aspects. The second thing I thought from Dweepa itself was really fascinating was that this epistolary mode embedded into the cinematic, narrative, which is quite unusual. You'd imagine that cinema can do a lot. We don't need it to also start writing letters, it's quite superfluous. So the literary critic in me started thinking, what could be the purpose of doing that? You could have different ways. You could have voiceovers if you wanted to give information, but to have letters being, as I understand it, written, and obviously then they're posted, right? And then they're also then delivered and they're opened and all that. This really made me think of a very favorite place of mine. Luca knows about it because he's been with me there. And it was really where we went to immediately after the Qatar meeting where you and I met, Bindu, which is Mauritius, and the postal, there's a museum of the post in Mauritius. And the reason I like that museum is that it really shows you in many different ways through maps and the lines of the postal, the kind of the ships bringing the post. Networking is important. The reason the insular nature of an island becomes archipelagic is because of networks. And in the colonial period, which evidently continues in the post-colonial, one of the ways of creating this network going was through the post. Without it, you were lost, you were just a speck in the ocean. So I think islands, which are embedded in this territorial matrix, are very dependent on the postal services, or are they? I mean, in a sense, the postal service becomes a way to assure everybody that the island remains a part of the nation and is dependent on the nation, or rather it's the interdependence, or the nation meets the island, or the post, the tentacles of the post reach even there. So I think maybe, I would love your views on this, but I'm feeling that this could be a reason for this mysterious and otherwise unnecessary use of the post. Other Nehruvian touches, such as tuna being the chicken of the sea and all this, like this, it's very fascinating how there's a constant attempt then to territorialize the island, whether it's to the postal services or whether it's giving a kind of, non-pescatarian name for the fish, which is so, to render it explicable to people on land. And of course, finally, I think when you moved through Sinjar, it was great to hear, Jasari. Thank you for making us hear that. I think the closing comment I want to make, though of course we could continue to talk about the specific elements in the materials you showed, is that I came to a realization as you closed your talk that cinema itself seems to be an extractive process. Popular cinema is an extractive process. And the Lakshadweep Collective want, obviously, now it seems is the moment, as always, for non-cinematic but mediated interventions. But can there really, as a media scholar, what do you think? Do you think that politically one can escape a kind of circuit of extractivism simply by moving the kind of media used? Is this a viable method of resistance, in your opinion? So I've given you a couple of questions, but mostly they're just excitement at the space you've opened up for us. And I know that Luca and I, at least, are going to be thinking about this material for a while. So I don't know if you want to have a quickly, maybe, Luca, what do you think? Should we give Bindu a moment to respond?
Need to always forget to unmute myself. Yes, of course. Thank you, Bindu.
Right. Thanks, Ananya. That's really fascinating set of responses. And this is what I was looking forward to. I agree with you that popular culture in general and cinema is always in excess, right? So there is this, in the most ideologically well-framed, tightly framed films, also you might have moments that slip out of that, that matrix, right?
Yeah.
So you are right that when whether it's Dweepa, whether it's Sinjar, I mean, Singer has this very disturbing way of connecting something which is not historically or is not a real incident in the island, but it's taking this imaginative leap and connecting the story of two women to putting them in Iraq and in Sinjar and so on, and sort of, embedding the local Muslim community in global, terrorist networks, etc., which is very disturbing. But if you look at the way in which the island, the sea, the ship, for example, the sort of, dilapidated ship that, the camera sort of, if you remember, that's where I stopped the video. Those all actually are slipping out of this sort of tightly defined kind of frame. So you're right, I'm in complete agreement. That's something which cinema does. And I know that this is something which you also have explored very well in your Kashmir work. So yes, I'm in agreement. In questions about, and this also makes me think a little more about Dweepa and its some of the intermedial aspects that emerge in Dweepa. Something which I didn't talk about because I also felt that I should be able to talk the most important aspects as much as possible, and so I kind of pushed it to the side. The epistolary is also accompanied by a kind of omniscient voice in the film in Dweepa, and very similar to the Films Division documentary kind of voice, the God's own voice of Films Division documentaries is what. So it's a very curious film in its aesthetic, and this is something which I also didn't talk much in the presentation, which is that it's a very bricolage kind of aesthetics. It has a developed sort of a documentary realism, and then also a kind of which is framed within a sort of realist melodrama as well. So you have it's a curious kind of film, so to speak. So there is, I think the documentary realism performed a few things, provided a few techniques and devices for the filmmaker, which wouldn't have been otherwise kind of available in any other sort of, or that was the most dominant mode of thinking about Lakshadweep, I guess, in the 1970s, right? So these are really interesting ways to think about the film. The other question that you asked about the postal, post and postal services and letter writing, etc. I think there are several kinds of transactions happening here between the airwaves, between cinema, between post and so on, which was there also seems to be, portable devices, portable messages, portable media. There is a transaction between different kinds of portability in that moment, right? So, like for example, all the films where, if you look at the up until 1990s, till the satellite communication sets in, most of the overseas, circulation of Indian films and Indian media was through portable media, right? So, films were sent by postal service. Reels would be sent by postal service to other parts of the world. Once video technologies come in, originals would fly from India to locations like different locations in the Gulf Council region, and they would be then kind of converted into the video cassette format, into the VHS format, and they would travel back legally and illegally to the. So that's a really brilliant question that, how does one think about intermediality in these ways as well, right? If you were to just think about messages, what is it to message through airways? What is it to message through portable devices, such as, paper regimes, right? Paper sort of imaginaries of letter writing. So that's I'm really grateful for that suggestion. And I agree that, cinema is also an extractive logic in terms of not just as an economy, but also as, extracting desire, right? It's the surplus of desire. And that's a very extractive sort of regime, especially in terms of hegemonic cultures. So, I'm in complete agreement, and it is certainly important for us to think about. But again, in the case of cinema, as I was talking about, and also in the case of radio, for example, right? So, there is, I didn't show much of it, but if you browse, you can listen to A.R. Kavarati, and you will listen, and this is true about various regional vernacular radio programming. So people like Vibhuti Duggal, Lakshmi Subramaniam, etc., have worked extensively on it, where they do talk, about how regional programming is tied to ideas of space, place, language, which is rather important. And the other scholar whom I mentioned, the linguist anthropologist, Nishant Choksi, who looks into Sandali script and practices, point out that how, this maneuvering around linguistic practices. So when I listened to, for example, in 2015, when another film which I didn't talk about, Anarkali in 2015, which is set in Lakshadweep, which actually kind of is about a Indian naval officer who's located there. It's a love story and so on, but the Lakshadweep becomes the kind of backdrop or the mise-en-scène, a beautiful mise-en-scène of the love story. They released a promotional video in the Jaseri language for Lakshadweep, residents, because it was set in Lakshadweep. So all these, these kind of small maneuvering within various media, linguistic and otherwise, I think are what sort of takes, takes this popular cultural kind of expressions towards a very complex, complex kind of framework where it is difficult to pronounce it as one or the other at times, right? So, well, that's my
really interesting. No, absolutely, and nice to get all those elaborations and clarifications. Luca, I wonder if you have any comments there for Bindu.
Yeah, so I was wondering if there's any question, please, again, put it in the chat box or raise your hand, that we are sure that we don't miss
yes, because we are so excited with Bindu's work that we are not asking our guests to, please. Yeah, exactly,
because we are also, getting, let's not say run out of time, but we're getting to the limit that we sort of self-imposed ourselves. So for the benefit of time, I would cull, I think, my questions and my observations to a single one that also goes back, Bindu, to the beginning of your talk. I was also very intrigued by the map. But okay, let's forget about that. Ananya has already asked on it. Another thing which I was also very interested in is when you were saying how you were commenting on Dweep, the film, right? And how Dweep means island, and how people, especially from the coastal communities, if I understood quite well, referred to with the same, Dweep as the archipelago itself. So it becomes a synecdoche for the Lakshadweep, the whole archipelago, and not just the island where they live in. And this actually took me back to a question that I was also kind of nurturing sort of in my mind when in our other seminar the Andamans. Because I think what I tend sometimes to forget when I think about, the relation between India and its archipelagic spaces is that we can think about the archipelago as a unit onto itself, which is then in relation to the sort of mainland, right? But also we should not forget that the archipelago itself has a plurality, right? And specific in the case of Lakshadweep, it's like around 40 islands, right? So I was thinking whether, and I was interested in knowing whether in the films that all of the films that or the clips, that you screened to us, starting from the ones from the film division of India, so more educational, right, and mission of those early films, moving on to the more recent ones, both from inside and outside of the Lakshadweep, sort of cinematic sort of environment in terms of the producers and the directors, etc. I was wondering, how is the Lakshadweep treated? So is the singularity of one island, which is different from the other for language reason, for cultural reason, etc., is it ever emphasized? So do you ever get a sense that they're talking about, say, Minicoy instead of the Lakshadweep? Or so can we extend their observations are they mapped onto the whole space of the Lakshadweep? Or does this actually singularity of a single island, which is not necessarily so much in relation actually to the others, even though they belong to the same union territory and to the same, geological configuration of an archipelago, is this ever brought to light?
Right. Thank you. So, the limited number of films that are on theme of or are on Lakshadweep often don't address this plurality of the archipelago, right? So for example, it's to begin with, for most mainlanders, Lakshadweep islanders talk some version of Malayalam, for example, right? So there is not even the recognition that there are distinct scripts and language, groups in the island. So the plurality of the island is not, as you rightly put, the synecdochical kind of, framing of Dweepa as Lakshadweep, while it is set in Minicoy, or something which is set in Kavaratti, but at the same time, it would be mapped on to all other parts of the island, to answer your question directly. So the plurality of the islands is not, does not figure in any of these screen imaginaries, so to speak. The mainstream film imagination that we are talking about, whether it's the film division documentaries or the mainstream film production.
But what would you say then in about say the imaginaries from Lakshadweep? Do you see in them, especially the most recent ones, a different take?
Yes, indeed. So they don't. They are one, of course, language specific. There are many which are language specific, but they also are talking about the locality in more. There is vibrant matter there, which is, as I said, lived and mapped through spatial practices and so on. So. Yes.
That's really fascinating. It seems to me that we've hit upon a very interesting theoretical point, if I may, that when the islands are viewed and the archipelago is viewed from the mainland, there is a tendency to reduce and almost like reduce multiplicity into a singularity, which approximates. So the island just becomes a mini version of the territory. The fractal nature, the fragmented, multiplicitous nature of the archipelago is not even accounted for. It's understood through very mainland lens, whereas completely, as you very nicely confirmed, if the production is from the media imaginary from within Lakshadweep, does different things completely. And it's not necessarily that they're going to zoom and show all the islands, but it's even in the way they focus on their lived materiality. It's almost like the other end of the spectrum. It's like a fractal nature, perhaps. But I think that's a really excellent point for us to take away and learn from. But I don't know. I think Luca and Vignesh, maybe it's time to draw this to a close, since we have, sadly come to the end of our allocated time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ananya, Vignesh, please. Oh, no, sorry, I saw you were speaking. I tend to speak a lot, so.
No, we all do. Don't
but
worry.
I can, sorry, if I can, to draw also this first part. So first of all, thank you very much, Bindu, for your wonderful talk. May I remind everybody that an earlier version of this paper, in a way, can also be read. Probably it will also be available somewhere in a sort of fuller and longer version, hopefully in a publication of yours in the future. But there's an early version of this which can also be found online in the Tenairevi dossier that Ananya and Ari curated on, and that came out in August, I think, this year, on Lakshadweep. So for anybody who is interested also in having something written that can be quoted, more easily quoted in your work, you can already have a look there. And we are looking, Bindu, for in the future for articles and essays on your media explorations of the Lakshadweep mediascape. I also want to remind everyone that our mini-series has not ended. It has ended for this semester, but it will be reprised in the next semester with another 2 sessions, again on the Lakshadweep and the Andaman Islands. So please stay tuned. And for Bindu and for everyone again, well, hopefully everyone will be seeing us on the YouTube channel. So this will become a public document that we can also refer to and keep for our records. I think this is very important. Thank you, Bindu, for agreeing to have this seminar recorded. So thank you very much, everybody. And I think, yeah, we can say goodbye to everybody.
Thanks again, Bindu. Thanks, Vignesh, and everybody. We'll see each other in the new year. Bye.
Ananya and Luca and Vignesh. Bye.